Thank you for watching. Subscribe on Deceived Husbands for more stories.
I woke up feeling like my head was about to burst. Dragging myself to the bathroom, I grabbed 2 painkillers and gulped them down, my stomach churning. I spent the next 10 minutes hovering over the toilet, waiting for the worst. As I sat there, the events of the previous day flooded back. My name is James Allen, and yesterday was the day my world turned upside down. When I got home from work, my wife, Helen, dropped a bombshell on me. She told me she loved me, but then admitted she had been seeing another guy for almost a year and was in love with him too. She tried to explain it as a simple act of compassion. Apparently, this man, whose name she wouldn't reveal, had been in a terrible car accident that killed his wife, leaving him unscathed. He was struggling with guilt, and Helen claimed she was just trying to help him cope. But somewhere along the line, they ended up falling in love. And yes, she confessed, they had slept together sometimes, she said. The sex was even great. As if that wasn't bad enough, she had the nerve to tell me that she still loved me and planned to come back eventually. But as long as this guy needed her, she was going to be there for him. She assured me she would still be there for our kids and me too. The guy was a lot younger than her, and she figured he'd move on eventually. But until then, she was determined to stay by his side. I was beyond stunned. It felt like the worst nightmare a married man could walk into. I did what any man would do. Accused her of being a 304 and a hooker. That's when Helen snapped. She said she was disappointed in my reaction and actually had the gall to tell me that if I really loved her, I'd accept the situation. She reminded me that in our wedding vows, I promised to love, honor, and cherish her. It was clear she was angry with me, but I was seething with rage. To avoid doing something I'd regret, I started drinking and shouting. Once I cooled down a bit, I asked her how she would feel if I found another woman. She didn't miss a beat, said, "Who would want you?" She pointed out that I was just a balding, middle-aged guy who'd put on a few too many pounds. She even warned me that if I tried to divorce her, she'd make my life a living hell. I was at a complete loss, my mind in meltdown mode. I couldn't think straight, and to be honest, I wasn't handling the situation well. I kept drinking and yelling until Helen packed a bag and announced she was leaving. She said she'd stay with her lover until I could calm down and accept reality. The next thing I remember, I was sitting on our bed, trying to take stock of my life. Helen was right, I was middle-aged. My hair was thinning, and I had to admit I was about 20 pounds overweight. But before I did anything about it, I had to find out where my kids were. It was Sunday morning, and they should have been home. A quick search of the house revealed they weren't there. Where on earth had Helen taken them? I was about to call her parents when I heard a car pull up. I peeked out the window and saw Helen's car, with our kids getting out. I met her at the door. "Nice to see you're sober," she snapped. "Where were the kids?" I demanded. "With me. I couldn't leave them with you in your state. You didn't take them to your lover's house, did you?" I hissed. "James, watch your language," she shot back. "They were with him," she added, as if it was the most natural thing in the world. "My friend is a kind person. You, on the other hand, were disgraceful yesterday." "Fair point," I admitted. "But why didn't you take them to your parents' place?" "They weren't home," she said as she brushed past me and went upstairs. I followed her into our bedroom. "Are you here to stay, or are you running back to him?" "Oh, please, James. Stop being so childish. I told you how things are. I'm not arguing with you about it. The discussion is over. Accept it or die, your choice. Despite how you're acting, I still love you. And like I said, when he doesn't need me anymore, he'll be back full-time." "So, what do we do now?" I asked, trying to keep my temper in check. "Right now, I'm packing a few things because I'm spending a few days with my friend until you cool down and accept this." "What about the kids?" I tried to shame her into staying. It didn't work. "If you don't want to watch them, call my parents. I'm sure they'll help." Helen packed another bag and left. My head was ready to explode, but I knew I had to keep it together for the kids. There was no way I was going to take Helen's affair lying down. No self-respecting man would. After she left, I checked on the kids and asked if they had any homework. They groaned, but I told them to get it done. When they finished, I said we'd go visit Pop and Grammy, Helen's parents. They loved going there because Pop was helping them build go-karts. Helen's parents, Robert and Margaret, lived on a small farm about 20 minutes away. Robert was retired and loved tinkering in his garage, where he worked on the go-karts with the kids. I figured it was a good time to talk to them about Helen's boyfriend and get their advice on what to do. As I checked in on the kids doing their homework, it hit me how much they meant to me. Henry, my oldest, was 16A football player but not big enough for a college scholarship. Emily, a year younger, was your typical teenager, pushing boundaries but a great student. And Oliver, the baby at 11, hated being called that, but Helen still did. Oliver was a happy accident. We hadn't planned on more kids, but Oliver had been such a joy. While the kids worked, I made myself a cup of coffee and started making a list of things to do. First on the list was calling my boss, John Harris. ID worked at the local Ford dealership for nearly 25 years, and John had been my boss for the last 12. I was one of the top mechanics, and John was sympathetic when I told him what was going on. His son had gone through a messy divorce recently, so he knew the drill. Damn, I said. That's one wicked woman. Tell me about it, John said bitterly. It was touch and go for a while. We thought the cops would arrest Chris any minute. These accusations are devastating and nearly impossible to disprove. Thankfully, Chris' ex-mother-in-law took her granddaughter to a doctor to prove she hadn't been molested. That saved Chris. God bless her, I said, shocked at what women can do. Amen to that, John replied. If you need anything, just let me know, James. I'll do what I can. Since I had some personal days and vacation time saved up, I asked for the following week off. John agreed and even offered to let me take all my time off if needed. As it turned out, that's exactly what I did. There's one more thing I need, I said. I need the name of a good divorce lawyer. That's easy, he said. Use the guy my son used. He's tough. Chris got the house, primary custody, and child support. His name is David White. I've got his number here somewhere. I called the lawyer's office, not expecting anyone to be there on a Sunday. But luck was on my side, Mr. White was in, and his secretary said he had a cancellation. If I could make it in 30 minutes, he'd see me. I told the kids to behave while I was out and headed to Mr. White's office. David White looked like he was in his late 30s, a good-looking guy with deep blue eyes and a friendly smile. What can I do for you today? He asked after I sat down. My wife told me yesterday that she's been cheating on me with a younger man, I said, feeling my face flush with embarrassment and anger. I laid out the events of the previous day. Mr. White took notes, shaking his head. When I told him Helen said she still loved me but planned to keep seeing the guy, he stopped me. Let me get this straight, he said, his eyes narrowing. Your wife says she loves you but plans to keep being with this guy. I nodded, embarrassed. Okay, go on, he prompted. I explained how Helen got angry when I refused to accept her plan, how ID called her a 304 and a hooker, and how Shed laughed when I asked how Shed'd feel if I found another woman. Shed told me no one would want me and threatened to ruin me if I tried to divorce her. She really said that? Mr. White asked, incredulous. No offense, Mr. Allen, but your wife sounds either incredibly callous or seriously messed up. No offense taken, I sighed. I think the same thing. I told him about how she left the kids at her lover's house after our argument and how they spent the night there. Mr. White's head snapped up and he smiled as he wrote something down. Okay. Hey, erase the 60,000 question. What do you want to do? He asked, steepling his fingers. I thought for a moment and then said, I can't live with this. I don't know if I can get past it, but I don't want to get destroyed in a divorce, and I don't want to lose my kids. Mr. White shook his head in sympathy. That seems to be the new trend for women facing divorce because of their bad behavior. But don't worry, I'm going to work hard to protect you. If you do divorce, you'll get at least 50 of your assets. But be warned, the courts don't care about infidelity. So, they'll have to pay alimony and child support, I said, feeling deflated. Yes, that's possible, but that's why we need to act fast, Mr. White said, reviewing his notes. Your wife has abandoned the marital home and left your kids at her lover's place. That's a big no-no with some courts. You have custody of the kids right now, and I think we can keep it that way. They'll try to get an emergency restraining order against your wife, allowing you to stay in the house, at least temporarily. The longer you're there, the stronger your case for primary custody. If we win that, you won't have to pay child support. Does your wife work? Yes, part-time at the clinic. She works on Tuesdays, Thursdays, and Sundays, I answered, suddenly realizing that's probably where she met this guy. Mr. White agreed and asked how much she made. I told him about $30,000 a year, while I made around $90,000. Now, I have to ask an important question. Do you still love her? Do you want to try to work things out? I looked down at the floor, thinking long and hard. When I looked up, tears were streaming down my face. I nodded but added, I do love her, but I can't accept this. She broke her vows, and am done. I want a divorce. Last question, Mr. White said, turning to a new sheet of paper. Tell me what assets you have. I mentally went over our finances. I told him we had about $3,500 in our checking account, $60,000 in savings, and a CD worth $2,50000. I also had around $180,000 in my 401k. Helen had slightly less in her retirement plan from her previous full-time job at the clinic. Our company offered a better healthcare plan, so we used that for the family. We had 2 cars in both our names, and of course, the house, though there wasn't much equity in it since Wed bought it a few years ago. Okay, hey Race, what I want you to do, Mr. White said. Ready for action? First, withdraw half of what you have in savings, checking, and the CD. Put that money in a separate account in your name only. I can't touch the CD, I explained. It's in both our names, and I can't cash it without her signature. No problem, he said, running numbers on his calculator. Take $25,000 out of savings, pay as many bills as you can from the checking account, cancel any joint credit cards, and apply for a new one in your name only. I still have a credit card from before we were married, I said. I don't use it much because our joint card gives cash back. Even better, Mr. White smiled. You won't need to apply for a new one. He quickly jotted down a list of instructions and handed it to me. Now, go out to my secretary and have her call Thompson Locksmith for you. Get the locks changed on your house, then come back here, and he'll fill you in on the next steps. Miss Adams got Thompson Locksmith on the phone, and I gave them my address. They promised to come around noon. I went back into Mr. White's office, and he was just getting off the phone. We're in luck, he said. If I fax my paperwork in today, we'll get Judge Roberts. Why is that lucky? I asked, confused. He's tough on cheaters, Mr. White smiled. He's an old-school judge who doesn't take kindly to spouses who cheat, whether they're men or women. Trust me, that's big in our favor. If he wasn't available, I'd have to do some more convincing, but I'm confident we'd still get what we want. Plus, Judge Roberts was a good friend of my father's. I know he won't mind if I call him at home. Mr. White stood up and offered me his hand, which I shook gratefully. Before you go home, get your banking stuff done. They'll prepare a petition for an emergency restraining order against your wife. She won't be allowed in your house or within 500 feet of you or your kids. Since she's staying with her lover and left the kids with him, that should help us get the order. It might be overturned later, but by then, you should be established in the family home as the primary caregiver. By Thursday, we'll have her served with divorce papers. Then we'll see how she reacts. For the first time since Helen dropped this bombshell on me, I felt like I was taking back control. The bank wasn't busy, so I quickly got a cashier's check for my share of the money and closed our joint credit card. I paid off the $480 balance from the checking account, then paid the mortgage 3 months in advance, which took another $2,200. There wasn't much left in the checking account. With the cashier's check in hand, I opened a new checking and savings account in my name only at a different bank, then headed home. When I got there, the kids were watching TV, so I loaded them into the car. We drove to my in-laws, and I saw Robert coming around the corner of his house from the garage. He waved and headed back around the house as the kids piled out and ran after him. Once inside, Margaret greeted me with a kiss on the cheek. A minute later, Robert came in, washed his hands, and greeted me. I hate to do this, I started, taking a deep breath, but Helen's having an affair, and am filing for divorce. I don't believe you, Robert snapped. Helen wouldn't do that. What proof do you have? She told me, I said quietly as tears started to slide down my face. Just then, the back door opened, and the kids trooped in. Please, stay outside for a few minutes, I told them. Why? Henry asked. Because I said so, I said more sharply than I intended. Henry saw the tears on my face and quickly ushered his siblings back outside. She told you? Margaret asked, shocked. Yes, I said firmly. and a lot more. I recounted the events of the previous day, including the part where she said the SX was good and how she threatened to ruin me if I divorced her. I also told them how she didn't think any other woman would want me. They were stunned, and Robert was angry. I still don't believe it. I'm going to call her and put it on speakerphone. He dialed his daughter's number and put the phone on the coffee table. Hey, Dad, Helen answered cheerfully. What's up? James here, Robert said bluntly. Are you having an affair? There was a long pause before Helen demanded. What did he say? He said you're having sex with another man and that you're in love with him. It's complicated, Dad, she pleaded. I'm trying to help this man. He went through a terrible tragedy, and I'm just trying to be there for him. Robert's face turned bright red, and through gritted teeth, he asked, Are you having sex with him or not? We've had sex, but I still love James. I just can't abandon this man right now. I love him too. I was shocked by Robert's reaction. Helen had always been a daddy's girl, and I assumed Robert would make excuses for her. Helen, Robert's voice was strained. I never thought my daughter would become an immoral woman. Dad, please, was all she managed before Robert hung up. A moment later, the phone started ringing again, but Margaret hesitated to answer. Leave it, Robert ordered, but Margaret tried to pick it up anyway. Robert grabbed the phone from her hand and threw it against the fireplace. I said leave it, he shouted. Margaret was shocked, and I was too. Dead silence filled the room as Robert and Margaret tried to process what they'd just heard. Finally, Robert came over and hugged me. James, I'm so sorry. I don't even know what to say. I can't believe our daughter has done this to you. We'll do anything to help you. Anything at all. We're here for you and the kids. They'll have Margaret talk to Helen later and let you know how it goes. Right now, I'm too angry to talk to her. I had to leave to get back home for the locksmith. After herding the kids into the car, I hugged Robert and Margaret and invited them for dinner so we could talk more. On the way home, Emily burst into tears. Are you and Mom getting a divorce? Where did you hear that? I demanded. From me, Henry said defiantly. I snuck back into the house and listened. I figured it was something bad. I just didn't think it was this. I sighed, realizing they had a right to know what was going on, but I wasn't sure how to tell them without causing too much pain. Damn Helen. Her selfishness was hurting the kids. I bet she never thought about that when she was with this guy. Unfortunately, it seems your mother and I will be getting a divorce, I said softly. But why? Oliver asked, starting to cry. Your mother has fallen in love with another man, I said simply. You mean she's having sex with another man? Emily said through her tears. I hate her. She's a total witch. Emily, don't say that about your mother, I scolded. But my words felt hollow since they echoed my exact feelings. The locks were changed just in time. 10 minutes after the locksmith left, Helen came storming into the driveway. You had to tell my parents, didn't you? I bet you called me a 304 and a hooker. She screamed. I thought you loved me, Helen, I said sadly. I do love you with all my heart, but I can't accept that you're going to be with another guy. You have no idea how much it hurt when you told me I was just an ugly middle-aged guy that no other woman would want. Basically, you're saying you're doing me a favor by staying with me. Your pity love I can do without. Not only did you say that, but you also threatened to ruin me, yet you dare to tell me you love me? Take a good, hard look at yourself, Helen. People who love each other don't do things like that. As for telling your parents, if you're so convinced that what you're doing is right, then it shouldn't matter that they know. Helen looked stricken by my words. Okay, I'm sorry. I didn't mean to say those things. She tried to apologize. I was just angry because you called me a 304 and a hooker. Really, James, to call your wife and the mother of your children those names? You promised to love, honor, and cherish me. Shame on you. If you truly loved me, you'd accept this. I'm not leaving you for him. I just love him too, and am trying to help him. He's much younger than me, and will eventually move on. Helen, I said, shaking my head slowly. If you're going to quote our wedding vows, you should include the part where you promise to forsake all others. And to remind you that a married woman doesn't go around opening her legs for young men just because they're hurting. Besides, I have accepted that you're damaged goods, and I don't want you in my life anymore. Like you said, accept it. I knew the clinic would take her on full-time. There was always a shortage of nurses, and she was a good one. After the hearing, the DNA results arrived in the mail. It took me half a day to work up the courage to open the envelope. When I finally did, my heart was filled with pure happiness for the first time since this mess began. My kids were mine. I reread the report several times, reassuring myself that I was their biological father. Then I wondered what I would have done if the report had said one or all of my kids weren't mine. In that moment of clarity, I realized I would love them the same no matter what. I even thought, for the kids' sake, would I be willing to forgive Helen if she left that guy and came home? The answer was no. She'd never be able to instill proper values in them. She was a bad influence, and I needed to keep her away from them. I used up all my personal days and vacation time to stay home with the kids. When that ran out, thankfully, Helen's parents watched them. Robert and Margaret still refused to talk to their daughter until she came to her senses. Robert said she called 3 or 4 times a day for a week before he blocked her number. The visitation schedule was left up to Helen and me to work out, but really, that meant our lawyers would communicate what we wanted. We finally agreed that Helen could visit Monday, Wednesday, and Friday between 6 and 7 in the evening. Margaret volunteered to supervise, but I insisted on being there for the first visit. I wanted Helen and Margaret to know the rules. On the first Monday, a car parked in the street, and Helen got out. I didn't recognize the car but realized it must be her lover's. Helen walked up to the house nervously and smiled at us. "Hello, James. How are you, Mom? It's good to see you." "Helen, you have to leave," I snapped. "The judge told you your lover wasn't allowed within 500 feet of this house." Horror spread across her face. But he just dropped me off." "Helen, are you brain dead? The judge was Clerno lover here. Tell that idiot to leave now, and I won't tell the judge." Helen nodded quickly and walked back to the car. Then I had a thought. I walked out at an angle and pulled a pin from my pocket. As Helen talked to her lover, I copied the license plate number down. Then I returned to the porch as the car drove off. "Okay, he said he'll come back to pick me up," Helen said defiantly. "Well, tell him to meet you down the street. I don't want him near the house." Helen's face turned red with anger. "James, I'm getting tired of how you're treating me. You didn't have to steal the money from our checking account or cancel my credit card." "Helen, I didn't steal anything. The money I took from the checking account paid off the credit card and 2 mortgage payments. I wanted to make sure the kids had a place to stay while we sorted this out. And as for canceling the credit card, I didn't want to be stuck with any expenses you might charge while you're with your lover." Helen's face flushed with what I assumed was anger and arrogance. "This isn't an affair, and he's not my lover, James. You're being an idiot." Before I could respond, Margaret stepped forward and slapped Helen across the face. Both Helen and I were stunned. "Mom?" Helen whispered, bewildered. "Helen, if you ever disrespect James again, he'll tear that dress off you and beat your butt red. Now, if you want to see the kids, they're in the living room. I need to have a word with James, and then he'll join you. But be warned, if you do or say anything wrong, he'll throw you out of this house myself." Helen nodded meekly and went inside. "James, I'm sorry for my brain-dead daughter," Margaret said sympathetically. "Thanks for sticking up for me," I said, genuinely grateful, then left. 2 weeks after the first hearing, as Mr. White predicted, the restraining order was lifted. But by that time, I had established myself as the primary caregiver, and I was allowed to stay in the house. Since Helen was still seeing her lover, her child support continued, but she could now have unsupervised visits with the kids in public. However, the judge warned her that she couldn't take them to her lover's house, and he couldn't be with her when she had the kids. After 5 months of delays, our first real court date to finalize the divorce arrived. Before our lawyers could speak, Judge Roberts asked if Helen or I had been to any counseling. Our lawyers admitted we hadn't, so the judge ordered 8 sessions of marital counseling. Neither of us opposed the sessions. I thought they were a waste of time, but I didn't want to anger the judge. I couldn't shake the feeling that Helen still believed she could convince me or the therapist that what she was doing was right. The first meeting with Dr. Allen, the therapist, went exactly as I expected. Helen spent most of the hour explaining why she thought she was doing the right thing. I thought Dr. Allen was going to choke when Helen first launched into her story. It was Helen's arrogance that truly shocked the therapist. In the second week, Dr. Allen began gently probing Helen's arguments. She asked if Helen thought it would be fair if I had found another woman. I cringed, expecting another attack on my manhood. But this time it didn't happen. Helen didn't answer right away, but I didn't care what she said. During the months that the divorce dragged on, I made some changes. I know it sounds vain, but when the woman you love tells you you're not good enough, you want to prove her wrong. So I took the plunge and had hair transplant surgery. I didn't need much, but it still cost about $5,000. I was back and forth on whether to do it, not sure if I wanted to deal with the teasing, but I was still using my vacation time, so I went for it. They buzz-cut my hair, pulled plugs from the back, and planted them in the front. I pretty much stayed in the house for the first week. The kids didn't know what to make of me and asked a bunch of questions. I told them it was a minor medical procedure. After about 11 days, I looked like my old self, and each week, the hair got longer. Once I healed, I started an exercise routine. I also began running. At first, I could only go 3/4 of a mile before I thought my lungs would explode and my legs would give out. Eventually, I worked up to running 11 miles. I also joined a gym and changed our family's diet. The kids groaned when I cut out fast food, cookies, ice cream, pizza, and other junk food. But I found some fun recipes online, and they loved it when I surprised them with something new. Some dishes didn't turn out great, but we laughed, scraped them into the garbage, and made sandwiches. The kids loved helping me in the kitchen, and it became a real family thing. Aside from the pain of Helen's betrayal, I was feeling better and better about myself. In fact, the first day back at work, I got a real ego boost. I checked in at the office to see what was on my schedule, and the receptionist, Helen, welcomed me back with a strange look. I thought she was going to tease me about my new hair, but she didn't. "Welcome back, James," she said, studying me. "There's something different about you." I blushed a little. "Oh, I've been on a diet. Lost 18 pounds. I want to lose maybe another 6. She laughed and nodded. "Well, it really suits you. If I wasn't married, I'd be all over you. Thanks for the ego boost, but according to my wife, I'm just a middle-aged guy with no sex appeal. So much so she's found herself a lover." I tried to joke, but it fell flat. By now, everyone at work knew about my situation. Storm clouds crossed Helen's eyes. "Helen's an idiot. Either that, or she's got a screw loose. You're a great guy, James, and plenty of women would be thrilled to have you. Don't let Helen get in your head." That was the best compliment I'd received in months. Suddenly, I didn't feel like such a loser. Dr. Allen asked Helen again, "Helen, how would you feel if James had come home and told you he was sleeping with another woman?" As I said, I was waiting for Helen to attack my manhood, but she didn't. I saw her eyeing me during our first meeting. I guess she couldn't say I had thinning hair or was overweight anymore. That was another ego boost. Anyway, I just sat in my chair, waiting as Helen seemed to think about what to say. She couldn't very well say that I couldn't have another woman if she had another man. "I guess if he was trying to help a woman get over some tragedy," she said arrogantly, "I'd be okay with it. What if he told you he loved this woman and that the sex was great?" Again, I'd accept it, Helen insisted, but he'd have to assure me the kids and I were taken care of. The session continued like that, with Dr. Allen trying to show Helen how ridiculous her position was, but Helen refused to budge. As I feared, these sessions were a waste of time. Helen was just using them to try to convince me she was right. That was never going to happen, and by then, the initial shock of Helen's betrayal had begun to wear off. It's funny how love works if it isn't nurtured. It starts to die. By the third week, something had changed. Helen came into the session much more subdued and said little. Mostly, she just listened. Whatever had happened had set Helen back. Maybe she wasn't as arrogant now because Dr. Allen was calmly and compassionately challenging her at every point. I also noticed Helen checking me out when she thought I wasn't looking. I continued working out, lost a few more pounds, and started doing yard work, which gave me a great tan. A couple of months before the therapy session started, I made another change. I was growing dissatisfied with my job. I loved fixing cars, and not just the engines. I got immense satisfaction from doing body work. I'd been fixing up old cars since I was 14. I could do it all. Now, I saw owning my own business as a way to spend more time with my kids. I talked it over with Robert, and he agreed to help me. I wanted to set up my own shop and start building a business, but I couldn't just quit. I didn't have the money to carry us until the business could sustain us. Would starve before I could make it work. But since Robert's farm was in an industrial zone, he agreed to let me start my business in his garage. Actually, Robert's tinkering shop had once been a barn for horses that he converted. There was plenty of space for both of us. If I got the business going, Robert agreed to lease me a piece of land on the road to build my own shop. I spent time at work studying how things were set up. The dealership was geared for higher volume than I anticipated. They did some body work at the dealership, but most was subbed out. With that in mind, I scaled down what I needed in tools and equipment. One thing for sure, I needed to build a paint booth. Robert was not only okay with that, but actually helped me build it. I spent the savings ID liberated from our joint account, plus a small loan from Robert to finance the venture. I started part-time, mostly on weekends and evenings. It was fun, and the kids often came out to watch or help. I enjoyed teaching Henry how to do things. Even Emily got her hands dirty and loved telling her friends how she helped change an engine or paint a Mustang. That also made her more interesting to the boys at school. I got business by word of mouth, and soon I was wondering if I shouldn't go full-time. That decision came to a head when I was told they needed me to work over the weekend to catch up on some jobs. I couldn't do it because I had my customers to take care of. I figured I was going to get fired when I went in to tell John the first couldn't work because I had my own business obligations. "Got a minute, John?" I asked, sticking my head into his office. "Sure, James," he waved me in. "Glad you're working this weekend. We've got 50 cars coming in this Friday that need to be gone over top to bottom. We have to get them out by the end of the month." I winced a little. Most people don't realize that factories offer special incentives to dealerships. If they sell a certain number of cars in a month, they get a discount off the invoice. For instance, the factory might say if you sell 300 vehicles this month, we'll knock 200 off your cost. That's a $60,000 saving. But if the dealer only sells 299, they get nothing. This was a big deal. "That's just it, John," I said, feeling the sweat on my back. "I can't work this weekend. I've started my own business on weekends, and I've got commitments." "I'm sorry, James," John said curtly, "but if you can't work this weekend, I may have to let you go." "I understand, John," I said resignedly. "I just hope there are no hard feelings. I've been building up a business to spend more time with my kids and make some extra money for their college funds. I'll clear out my locker." "I hate to lose you, James," John said sadly. "Tell me about your business. Where are you located, and what kind of work are you doing?" I explained that I'd set up shop on my father-in-law's property and had tools for just about any car repair, including bodywork. "Go grab a coffee and come back," John said as he reached for the phone. I didn't want coffee, so I went to my locker and put my stuff in a box. Losing this job meant it was going to be tight for a while. The kids would have to go on Helen's health insurance, as I'd taken her off mine, but I was confident I could make it. I was turning away almost as much business as I was taking in. John waved me back into his office when he saw me. "I've got a deal for you, James," he said excitedly. "If you work this weekend, we'll reimburse you for any money you lose if your customers are unhappy." "No," I shook my head. "I can't do that to my customers." "James, hold on. I'm not done," John said, sliding a piece of paper across the desk. It was an independent contractor agreement. "I really need you this weekend. I also think you can convince your customers to wait a few days. If you do that and your shop passes our inspection, we'll hire you as an independent contractor to do some of our body work." I was stunned but agreed. After that weekend, I was working full-time at my business. Occasionally, I went to the dealership if they had a problem and I wasn't busy. Robert started helping me part-time, and Margaret agreed to do my books. I was now making more money than ever. The only thing still messed up in my life was my marriage. After the 4th counseling session, I wanted to end it. I didn't care what Helen was doing with her new love. Oh, don't get me wrong, it still hurt when I thought about my wife being with another man, but I wasn't thinking about it as much. During our 5th session, I decided to go on the offensive. I figured if I attacked Helen hard enough, she might want to end these pointless sessions. I decided to confront her on the most hurtful thing said that I was too ugly to attract another woman. When Dr. Allen asked if I had anything to say, I turned to Helen. "Helen, I've decided you're not only selfish but also nasty. I said venomously. How dare you tell the man you supposedly love that he's an ugly middle-aged guy no woman would ever want? You hurt me in a way I don't think he'll ever get over. Oh God, James, I'm so sorry, she sobbed. I'm ashamed I ever said that. If I could take it back, I would. I do love you, just not enough to give up your lover and keep your sorrow to yourself. You'll need them more than I do, I snapped. Helen burst into uncontrollable sobbing. No matter what Dr. Allen or I said, we couldn't calm her down. Eventually, Dr. Allen called the session to an end, but gave us homework for the next one. I wasn't looking forward to it because these sessions were a waste of time. The homework was a series of questions. Some made sense, like our relationships with our parents or how our sex life was. Others didn't, like our favorite food and drink or what kind of vehicle we drove. But one question made me stop and think if I could change one thing. What would it be? I put the questionnaire away after reading that. I wanted to think about it. The next day, I wrote that I wished I'd been a better husband so my wife wouldn't have stopped loving me. We turned the papers in at our next session, but Dr. Allen didn't look at them. Instead, she asked if we had any questions or something we wanted to discuss. I'd like to ask Helen a question, I said immediately. Dr. Allen nodded, and I turned to my estranged wife. Helen, I don't see that we're getting anywhere with these sessions. You've made it clear you're not leaving your friend Peter Mitchell, and that leaves no chance for reconciliation. Why don't we stop this and get the divorce done? How do you know his name? Helen asked, shocked. The first time you came to visit the kids, I got his license number. After that, it wasn't hard to find out his name. But it doesn't matter. I don't care about getting back at him or even talking to him. I just don't care anymore. I want to move on. Helen looked at me with the saddest eyes I'd ever seen. I hated seeing her in pain and wanted to hug her, but I knew that wouldn't solve anything. So I continued, I know your lawyer isn't happy with the settlement I've offered. Well, I've told my lawyer to offer alternatives. I'm willing to give you more visitation with the kids. I'm also offering $1,000 a month in alimony for 3 years. I just want out. I watched Helen for a reaction, but all I saw was sadness. Shed made it clear she wasn't going to stop seeing the guy, and I couldn't and wouldn't accept my wife being with another man. I just didn't understand how she thought I could live with that. At this point, it didn't matter. I just wanted out. I pushed to end this farce. I know what you said about me was partially true. It hurt like hell when you said it, and I told you I didn't think I'd ever get over it. But as time goes on, I realize I'm getting over it. As you can see, I've tried to fix myself up. I don't think I'm the man you thought so little of when you took up with Peter. I've also started dating. After we divorce, you can take care of your guy as long as you want. But it's time to end this, if only so you can rebuild your relationship with the kids. With that, Helen burst into tears and fled the room. Dr. Allen looked as stunned as I was. Finally, she composed herself and told me she wanted to see Helen alone for the next session and then me for the last one. With a sigh, I agreed. When Helen first dropped this bomb on me, I was furious and filled with hate. But months later, I was just worn out. I could see the pain this was causing not only me but Helen, her parents, and most of all, our kids. I wanted it to stop. I was no longer furious that Helen was with someone else. When I arrived for my final meeting with Dr. Allen, I was relieved that Helen wasn't there and that this would be the end of counseling. James, I want to commend you for your restraint through these sessions, Dr. Allen began. I know this has been incredibly painful for you. After meeting with Helen last week, I think I finally understand what happened to your wife. I sat on the edge of my chair, eager to learn why Helen had destroyed our marriage. Do you remember the homework I gave you? She asked. I nodded. I'd forgotten about it, and figured it was of little value in these sessions. The way you both answered one particular question surprised me, Dr. Allen said, pulling out 2 pieces of paper. The question was, if you could change one thing, what would it be? Do you remember that? I nodded. You answered that you wished you could have been a better husband, so your wife wouldn't have stopped loving you. When Helen heard that, she broke down and cried harder than ever. It took me quite a while to calm her down. I didn't know what to think, say, or do, so I just sat there. James, your wife never stopped loving you. Yeah, that's why she kept seeing Peter, because she loved me so much. Dr. Allen gave me a disapproving look but sighed. James, What I discovered about Helen is that she was going through a severe midlife crisis. As the kids got older, she felt her life slipping away. She is, and I suspect always has been, a warm and caring person. Somewhere along the line, she found Peter, who needed her terribly. She confused her desire to be young again and Peter's need for forgiveness over his wife's death for love. That doesn't change anything, I protested. She's still with Peter. Actually, no, she's not. James? Really? This was news to me. Then why didn't Helen tell me? I know this doesn't change your feelings, but you need to know the truth. Peter left town the same day you told Helen you were dating and just wanted to finalize the divorce. She figured Shed already lost you. I thought about that, but Dr. Allen was right, it didn't change my mind. Too much had been said and done to go back. I had my life on track now, and I wanted to move forward. I could never trust Helen again, and I didn't want to live like that. But most of all, I wanted the kids to bond with their mother again. Emily's grades had slipped badly since this started, and I was sure she was still angry at her mother. Oliver had become sullen and withdrawn and was acting out in school. That was perhaps the worst consequence of Helen's actions. Oliver was no longer that happy-go-lucky kid. Henry handled it the best of all. He wasn't angry or sullen, but any time his mother's name came up, he changed the subject. Maybe I'm wrong. Perhaps his reaction is worse than the girls'. I just don't know. One last thing, Dr. Allen said, pulling out the second piece of paper. This is Helen's answer to the question about changing one thing. She wrote that if she could change one thing, it would be that she never met Peter Mitchell. The divorce went through, and as per the agreement, Helen visited the kids on Wednesdays and Fridays. I made sure to take the kids out on Fridays before Helen arrived. At first, our interactions were formal and awkward, but then we started sharing meals together with the kids. Then one evening, Helen asked if she could stay the night. No, I chuckled. The bed in the spare room isn't that comfortable. It's better if you go back to your place. And next time, don't think I'd be in the same room alone with you. As for Peter Mitchell, his story wasn't entirely true. His wife died when she drove away from him after finding him cheating. She was speeding and died in a car crash. Why did he leave town? I guess it was because of a severe beating he took outside a bar. 5 broken ribs, a busted kneecap, 6 missing teeth, and 2 busted nuts. I had to call in a favor with some friends. It was worth it. The beating ensures he'll never be with another woman, let alone please one. As for Helen, she eventually restored a loving relationship with Emily and Oliver. No matter what she did, there always seemed to be a distance between her and Henry. I would have thought Emily would hold a grudge, but she was the first to fully embrace her mother. Helen finally mended fences with her parents. However, like Henry, there was a slight coolness with her father. Most Sundays, we had dinner there like a family, but we weren't. Helen kept telling me how sorry she was for everything. I finally told her to stop. They'll never forgive her, so it's useless to try. I added, "Oh please, Helen, stop being childish. I told you how things are. I'm not arguing with you about it. The discussion is over. Accept it or don't, it's your choice. We're never getting back together. Even if you were the last woman on earth and the fate of mankind depended on me sleeping with you. It'll pass." 3 years later, I got married. I married Emily's teacher, and it's amazing how we met. That's a story for another time. But what matters is that the kids love her and have accepted her as part of the family. Helen still hasn't accepted that I've moved on. Well, I'm not doing anything about that. The discussion is over. She either accepts it or she doesn't. Thank you for watching this gripping story of betrayal, heartbreak, and the strength to move on. What do you think about this situation? Can people truly change after such a betrayal, or is trust forever lost? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more stories like this. Stay strong, and see you next time.